Hi, everybody. It's Mo Bunnell, author of The Snowball System, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. I and my team have trained over 15,000 experts all over the world on sound, effective, efficient, and authentic business development techniques. I'm here today with David Burkus. David is an organizational psychologist. He's author of several best-selling books, and his latest, called Leading from Anywhere, is great. And we dig into this episode specifically how you can establish, build, and foster great client relationships. Really goes for any relationship, but we're thinking about clients. Great relationships in this virtual world that we're in. This is a skill we all need. It's going to become more important, not less. David tells us exactly how to do it. Now, before we get in, know that if you want some really great resources from us, an instant download with 8-minute read that's got the 8 beliefs you need to become great at growth, and our weekly insights dropped right in your inbox, go over to growbigplaybook.com, growbigplaybook.com, and you can get the instant download, get signed up for those weekly insights, dropped right in your inbox. It's awesome stuff. Go over and do that right now, and then you'll be primed to learn the most from David. So these things can work hand in hand. So without further ado, let's hear David Burkus's content from his great book, Leading from Anywhere, on how we can meet, foster, and develop great relationships virtually. Hey everybody, it's Mo, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. If you didn't catch them, go back and listen to the prior 2 episodes where I asked David Burkus some secret questions that I'm not going to tell you now that were really good, and you're going to learn a lot from them. But today, I want to dig into one thing. And David, this is maybe the thing that's popped up more than any other question over the past year or so of our client base. And it's real simple. How do I develop and deepen relationships when everything is virtual? So can you use the content and Leading from Everywhere and help us answer that question? Because I know people are on the edge of their seat. They want to know the secret sauce that you've got in your brain.
Yeah. So you're exactly right. This is a real problem. I mean, I was reading a study. It obviously couldn't make it into Leading from Anywhere. I was reading it because it was published a week ago, but it was looking at the first half of 2020, looking at people's networks, judging the size of somebody's networks and relationships. And it found that from January to June, the average person's network shrunk by 25 to 30%, right? But here's what I think is interesting. That decrease was almost entirely driven by males. And this is a hasty generalization. I realize gender is much more diverse than just this, but because on average, men tend to bond and build relationships around activities, women tend to do it around conversations, and there are no activities to participate in when the world is locked down. Right? So we saw almost all of the reduction in relationships on that one side, that activity-driven side, not necessarily the conversation side. And you saw this too, I bet, because you saw in early April or May, people tried to create these sort of virtual activities to join together in, right? Everything from like, let's all take a group cooking class to let's just have a cocktails hour on Zoom. And like, I'll be honest, nothing is more depressing than drinking alone by yourself with a screen full, like a Brady Bunch square of people that you can't be in person, right? So we all got a little too hungover from Zoom happy hours, and it wasn't because, right, it wasn't a sort of a real activity, right? And so when you're looking to use a tool like Zoom to connect and deepen that relationship, it takes a lot more structure. It takes a lot more intentionality than just, we're going to plan this activity and it's all going to work out. It takes a level of conversation that people who are skilled at having a deeper conversation have. So that means show up with specific questions that you can ask to deepen the relationship. There's a couple different ways you can do this. All of them work really, really well. On internal teams, we run things like what we call fika, which is the Swedish word for to have coffee. It's just getting together to have a coffee time with somebody. But the whole point of it is to get to know your coworker in a non-work environment. So the whole point of the conversation is not work related. It's not it's much more broad than that. We're looking to build those bonds. There's also the idea of work sprints, which is time where you pair together with people and do work. You just do it alone together, right? So I actually couldn't have written my book without this. Every day, every weekday at 11 a.m., I had a work sprint appointment set with 2 other writer friends of mine who were working on books. And we would exchange a few pleasantries, and then we'd focus in on the writing. And then when we got a little tired, 25, 30 minutes in, we'd put our head up, we'd talk for a little while, et cetera, right? It was sort of our structured way of trying to do it. The interesting thing about virtual work is it doesn't make relationships unimportant. It makes them more important, but it takes much more deliberateness to structure those things. And I've talked about activities here, but there's other stuff too. Like, what are the little rituals that you are going to develop on your team, right? We all have those little rituals. Could be like a Monday's high five thing. It could be an inside joke. I've seen other deeper rituals on teams, and the ones that are sort of most meaningful in a Zoom environment are the ones that can obviously translate into that. So I've seen rituals. My favorite one, actually, I'll just tell you, I'll just jump right to it. My favorite ritual for a team of people is that instead of using the applause or emojis or stuff that's built into web conferencing, they decided whenever somebody has a good point, they're going to use silent clapping, right? From sign language, from American Sign Language or British Sign Language as their sort of tool, which is funny because then they're working with clients. And they're in this meeting and there's 3 or 4 people from the client side, 3 or 4 people from the Zoom. Somebody makes a good point and the whole screen's filled with this. And the client's like, what's that all about? Then you explain it to them. Now they're in on the ritual. So they're part of the in group, right? We used to, when we were in person, we used to develop these rituals just sort of organically. They just kind of happened. Well, now we've just got to be a little bit more deliberate about it, but it doesn't mean it can't happen. Right? So between structured conversations that actually explore non-work topics and build and deepen that relationship and physical things like rituals, we can go pretty far in building and deepening relationships in a virtual environment. What we can't do is just rely on being in the same space together to build it for us, like all of the people on the activity-based network side were doing forever and then found themselves out of practice. It takes structure, it takes deliberation, it takes a plan. But now at least I hope this interview has provided a little bit of that plan that you can go as a jumping off point to figure out how can I have more of these conversations? What are our team rituals or even our client side rituals, right? What are the things we're going to build that are meaningful and let people feel like they're in this in group with us that create that?
I was giving you a high five for people that so
I love it.
Listening, obviously there's some people watch and some people listen. So if you're listening, you couldn't see me waving my hands with the silent high five, or the applause, but I was doing it. David, I really like that. We had a client that for their standing ovation, they all go like this and put a big O over their head with their arms. So for folks who can't see, I'm just creating a big O with my arms, but you could really visibly see it even on the big Zoom board because you're doing your whole body like that. In college, that was our fraternity called that a black hole, and that beat anything of rock, scissors, or paper. But you only got one black hole for your lifetime, so nobody ever did it. So, follow-up question back. I'm really keen on these questions. In one of the past episodes, everybody go back and watch them. David gave us a really great question to start to foster relationships and transition for the sort of the open-ended get to know you to a little bit more of a sharing struggles and starting to think about commercial things. So David, on these structured calls, intentionality, I love the word you use there around really thinking about how we can bond a little bit more in a virtual environment. What are some of those questions that you'd recommend people ask each other and answer?
Yeah, so I think candidly, the question itself doesn't matter as much as having a plan, right? Because if you're just getting in there and you're relying on we're going to feel each other out, et cetera, you're not going to ask those deeper questions. The point of the questions, though, is to ask questions that can be answered in a work or a non-work context. So instead of saying stuff like, what do you do? Or what's your job function? I'll say things like, what are you looking forward to? Or what are you most excited about right now? What are you most thankful for right now? I can answer that about work, or I can answer that about anything. I can say, Tom Brady just won his 7th Super Bowl. That's pretty cool. And now you know that I follow football. I self-disclosed some other personal piece. Truthfully, my favorite question, because I'm a bit of a nerd, is when I feel that I'm in a place in the conversation where I can safely ask this, I will ask people, who's your favorite superhero? And here's why. It has nothing to do with the superhero. Everyone has one, or they hate superheroes, but that elicits a cool story too. And everyone has a reason why. So, my favorite superhero, for example, is Batman. What I like about Batman is that he's not super. right? He's someone with immense wealth and a sense of responsibility. I think those two things should almost always go together. He's someone who's focused on making the world a better place. So he's developed himself personally through martial arts and the discipline of it, right? But I like that idea that he's relatable because he's not super, but he is someone who feels driven by a cause, etc. Right? And now anybody else who is Batman can bond. And I guess technically anybody who has Iron Man can bond too, because really they're the same character. They're just in two different franchises, right? But everybody has that story, whether it's Wonder Woman, if it's Green Lantern, or again, they have they say no one. I never really got into superheroes, and I can go, great. Well, what was your thing when you were a kid? Right. And we can still ask that question and find out a bit about that history. Now, that's not one I'll throw out right off the bat. I'll usually start with a question like, what are you looking forward to? Or what are you really grateful for right now? Because again, that can be answered work related should they choose. But as we get further, I'll bust out some of those questions that encourage people to dive into their childhood or at least something older than a decade about their history. And it creates this beautiful jumping off point in learning more about them. And the more I know about them, the more I have reasons to follow up with them, the more things I have to discuss with them, the more likely I am to find something we have in common. But even if it's just little stuff, right? Like, Mo, now you know that I like Batman. So when the new Batman movie finally comes out at the end of this year, you can send me an email, go, hey, did you see this new trailer? Even if that's just a reason to ping a prospective client you haven't talked to in 6 months, it still goes way further than just, hey, I wanted to check in on you, see if you had any, whatever, right? Those little personal details go so much further.
Oh, yeah. Well, and back to our mutual friend Adam Grant's uncommon commonality. I mean, you can't see it up in the corner, I don't think, but all the graphic novels that are up there. And I was thinking, like, I think I would choose somebody on the Justice League or on the Legion of Superheroes, almost because I like eclectic things. But like Cosmic Boy or Element Lad, I don't know if you know the Legion of Superheroes, but little more obscure DC comic that I always liked when I was a kid. And anyway, we would, if we weren't doing a podcast, I would ask you more about Batman, and I would tell you about Element Lad right now. So it totally works. I could just actually feel myself in it. So yeah, love that question.
Right. No, and
David,
I was just going to say, and at the very least, we bonded over being in the DC franchise, which, despite the fact that their movies recently have been terrible, is still the better comic book franchise.
I've flipped, man. I was DC up until like 5 or 6 years ago, and I just finally made the switch. I held on for a long time, David. I'm 53. I held on to my mid-40s, and I finally flipped to Marvel. Am I an okay person? Am I all right?
I mean, I'll give you a little absolution, Mo, but there's more than just the movies, right? So,
I love it. Well, hey, David, this has been so fun. People are going to want to, you've dropped so much knowledge here. People are going to want to get more of that from you. I'm guessing they might want to go to davidburkus.com. Can you validate that? Is that the right place to go?
That's the right place to go. It's an easy place to go. Actually, there is a Batman reference on the website. So there you go. And again, it's relatively, if you're listening and you're like, I don't even know how to spell Burkus, doesn't matter. Google does. So if you type it in, you'll either find me or you'll find the interior designer, Nate Burkus, and you'll know you're in the wrong place.
All right, I know we've closed out the show, but I got to ask you one more. Is Batman Unwrapped your favorite graphic novel, or is there a different one?
So my favorite graphic novel has nothing to do with DC or Marvel. It's actually the original graphic novel of 300, because I also loved Gates of Fire, which is the Stephen Pressfield novel about the Battle of Thermopylae. So that would actually be my favorite graphic novel, right? Of the Batman, yeah, I like Batman Unwrapped a lot, but I gotta go with that as a favorite graphic novel.
I love it. Well, 300's up there. It's really big. It's like a big bound thing, and I have it up there, so it's up on the.
It's cool.
David, this has been awesome. It's so cool, and the art is so good. All right, well, we bonded on that, everybody. That's David Burkus. He's the bomb. Yeah, I know you love him because you had an uncommon commonality with something around superheroes there. Go to davidburkus.com. Check out his stuff. He has a ton of resources, really good stuff. Now, if you haven't listened to the prior episodes I taped with David, you got to do that because he added even more value back there. And we got one last question we're going to ask in our next episode. I'm going to ask David, how do you keep focused on the long-term stuff in a virtual environment that's going to pay dividends for you for years instead of worrying about all the day-to-day things? How do we build our platform so it's really going to pay off for us?